Okay, chapter 17 here, we're talking plyometrics. This is program design. We're still in kinesiology 230. And when we look at what the book is getting after here with program design, starting on page 458, it's good stuff. But when you get deeper into this and you start doing some more programming, you're going to end up looking deeper and deeper, more into different things. Like Don Shu is a great example of this in terms of like plyometric program design. I'll let you do the research on that, but he's a well-known gentleman in the field, been around for decades. Um, what I did is I took the list of things that they note here: needs, analysis, mode, intensity, frequency, recovery, volume, exercise order, progression. And I'm just going right down the list for you. And I'm cutting and pasting right from the book into the slide. And I'll hit some of these bullet points here, but some of this is just things you can kind of read over while I'm talking, or just hit pause and move on to the next slide when you're done. But you have to have a training program and to really have the best effect with your clients, but you have to understand why you're doing what you're doing with your client, and does it serve a purpose with your client, instead of just having your client randomly box jump until they're exhausted. It's kind of silly, but I've seen trainers do that. So you have to be able to evaluate your client's current capabilities, and also align what you're trying to do with the box jumping or hurdle jumping or whatever the actual plyometric may be. It could be something as simple as jumping rope, which is a very low level type of plyometric, as you jump over a rope every time. It's a low level plyometric. And it has to match their abilities. So you do this needs analysis on the front end, and part of it is kind of understanding the person. That includes their age or training experience, injury history, physical testing results, training goals, incidents of injury. These are the types of things I want you to read through and hit pause and read through. But they do have their place in understanding more about your client. You would presumably have all of this in place anyways when you first meet your client. All right, mode. The mode of plyometric training is determined by the general parts of the body that are being performed or being used to perform the exercise. If you're working on a pitch for softball and you're throwing a medicine ball, it's going to be total body fitness. If you're working on plyometrics for upper body strength, you're probably going to be chucking a medicine ball or doing some kind of plyometric push-up for upper body. If you're doing lower body work, you're doing depth jumps, for example, to work on more explosiveness, to do jumping for basketball. So it just depends. It depends on the sport, depends on the activity, depends what your client wants to accomplish. That'll dictate what mode that you use. And they go into upper body and lower body plyometrics here, and they have a little bit in terms of lower body plyometrics are appropriate for clients involved in virtually any sport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I agree with this. You have this specificity for lower body work, no doubt about it, but you kind of have this global effect where as you're doing a plyometric exercise, your body just gets better at being able to be more explosive. Now, when you get into high-end training, the specificity part really takes over, and you have to be specific to what the person's trying to accomplish. But I'll tell you, even doing just like low-level plyometrics, I mentioned doing jump rope, or doing 6-inch box jumps or 3-inch box jumps, as opposed to like a basketball player doing 24-inch box jumps. They have their place. They have their place on the neurological side to be able to get the neurological system to actually fire a little bit better. But again, once you get a little bit more specific, that kind of changes the context of what we're doing here. With upper body movements, whether it's throwing a ball or throwing a medicine ball or doing a plyometric push-up, you have these upper body drills that you'll do to train your client. And I love how they talk about being able to reach velocities and magnitude to have to 6,000 degrees per second, which is spot on. But again, I said it earlier, you also have to be able to go from 6,000 degrees per second to nothing. You have to be able to decelerate that arm as they follow through, which is a whole nother style of training in itself. So, you look at this and you go, okay, the plyometric training will help on the front end mechanics to be able to throw faster, but make sure you don't forget the backside mechanics. When you look at the two, you'll find more research on one than the other, and they talk about this in the book in terms of lower bodies a little bit more. And they go into plyometrics for the upper body include medicine ball throws, catches, and push-up variations. And the catches, and again, I wish they would have delved into this a little bit more. The catches themselves, if I throw a medicine ball at you and you have to catch it and decelerate as you're rotating, that's eccentric loading. Now, what happens is you're catching the medicine ball and then you're chucking it back to the person. Now there's a continuum, if you will, And you'll find this in another presentation where that whole process starts with strengthening, working on cable crossover, working on rotational movement pattern. We talked about the specificity and training for a golf swing. And I talked about using the hips. Well, this, just go ahead and use the hands and rotate. Then it becomes the person has the medicine ball. They start in a cocked position and then they throw to a person. It's handed back to them. They start from the cocked position and they throw it. Then the person has the medicine ball in the release position up front. They still have the medicine ball. They take it, go into that cocked position, and then throw. So they work on the deceleration, then throw. And then from there is where you have the partner actually throw the medicine ball at the person, and the participant catches the ball and releases back to the person. So there's a continuum here, that you're not really seeing presented in the book. And when I say that this can be a topic that can take an entire semester, especially with like lab assignments where we do different types of plyometric drills, it totally could. And it's fun stuff to be able to chuck medicine balls around. But just understand that you have these different variations of exercise that you can use. And they talk about the different positions that you have in like a sport like baseball where you're throwing a ball, using your arm. And you can work on the different components of a throw or a bat swing. With intensity, it refers to the amount of effort exerted by the muscles and connective tissues and joint. This is kind of self-explanatory, it makes sense. It depends on who's in front of you, like who your client is and what you're going to do with them. If it's going to be like 16-inch box jumps or 8-inch box jumps, it's just jumping rope. Are you having them hop upstairs? Are they going horizontal hops? So you have a different type of hopping movement pattern where you have to have an active landing on the ground for them to be able to apply force to jump to the next jump. Depends who's in front of you. If you're going to do a double leg jump or if you're going to do single leg jumps, it just depends what you're doing. But the intensity matters because when you put this in a subcategorization, if you will, low intensity exercises like this are on one side and high intensity exercises are like on the other side. So if perhaps you see a quiz question that asks you in regards which of these is a high intensity plyometric exercise, you're probably going to say depth jump, just saying. But just understand that, doing a depth jump is different than doing a box jump. A box jump is where you're standing and you jump on a box. A depth jump is where you are standing on an elevated surface like the box and then you hop off the box and then jump up in the air or jump onto another box. So the intensity goes up exponentially because there's an amateurization phase where you have to flick the switch where you hit the ground when you jump off that box and jump back up on the next box. It's some cool stuff, but I'll have some videos at the end for you to look at. But understand when you see this later on, that depth jump is a higher intensity. All right, frequency. The number of training sessions per week is pretty straightforward, but they talk about frequency and intensity are inversely proportional. Frequency increases, the intensity should decrease, and vice versa. And I would say you can mix and match, but if you're going to go ahead and do moderate intensity plyometric training, it shows that research 2 times a week is best. Now, I'll tell you, like if you do ABC drills for running technique, that's a low-level plyometric exercise or movement pattern that is built into those drills. Or if you're doing jump rope as part of your warm-up, that's a very low-level plyometric. You can do that each day and perhaps have a lower volume, but a higher amplitude or a higher intensity type of work when you jump onto a 24-inch box or an 18-inch box or jump and land on one foot. So you can play around with the intensities from day to day to day. They don't have to be all just jumping onto an 18-inch box. You can do different things to mix and match your workouts. So for recovery, it makes sense, right? If you're going to have different workouts of different intensities, you're going to have different recovery times for those different workouts. So if it's a higher intensity workout, it's going to be a longer rest or recovery period. Now, when you talk about sets, because it's power oriented, your work to rest ratio is going to be anywhere between 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, meaning if you have a minute of work, you're going to have 5 minutes of rest or 10 minutes of rest, depending upon the actual exercises being performed. When they talk about down here, recovery for depth jumps might range from 5 to 10 seconds of rest between single repetitions. So you do your depth jump where you stepped off your one plyometric box, hit the floor, and then jump onto the next box or jump up nice and high. You would do one of those and then you would have rest about 5 to 10 seconds and do your next depth jump. After you've done your set of 5 or whatever it is, then you're going to recover for 2 to 3 minutes. So, plyometric training, actually, you have to allocate in some time for this. When you have this here, if you have shorter recovery times in between, they say attenuate, and it's going to take away from the potential benefits, is what they're saying there. And you want to have the ability to have maximal effort with every one of your plyometric movement patterns. So if you were doing something like multiple medicine ball throws for a minute, it's an AMRAP, as many reps as possible protocol. You're doing that as a conditioning type of drill, not so much of an explosive type of drill. And what they get into in this little paragraph here is they're talking about it being anaerobic in nature, and really it's way over to one side. It's the phosphagen system, and it should be very explosive in nature. And you want to focus on the neuromuscular side of the process that also includes the explosiveness, the quickness, and in some regards, there's a reactive component as well. If I'm throwing you a ball and then you're catching and throwing it back to me right away, there's a reactive part of it. There's also a stretch shortening cycle that you're trying to refine over and over and over again. So what they talk about here is, in terms of, generally speaking, times of 60 to 120 seconds should be allowed, for full recovery. And then 48 to 72 hours between sessions is typically recommended. And when they talk a little bit further about volume, they talk a little bit in terms of if you're doing bounding or jumping, or how many times your feet touch the floor with like a box jump. That's a way to quantify your volume, and you have to find ways to quantify whether it's the amount of yardage that you do hopping horizontally, or it's the total amount of inches that you hop when you jump up and land on a box. Whatever that is, you have to come up with a way to quantify. But they will say this when they talk about the plyometric sessions: the entire plyometric exercise session for beginners should never exceed 30 minutes. Just kind of commit that to memory. In terms of exercise order, if they're being incorporated into a workout, they should be performed before another exercise. So you wouldn't go necessarily do heavy squats and then go do plyometrics because you've just exhausted your ability to be explosive. So you would normally do a generalized warm-up, a specific warm-up, do your box jumps. Perhaps even in that situation, you might do a variation of a box jump per se to be able to work on the explosiveness in that particular plane of movement. And then you do your squats. The idea is to have greater potentiation. If you remember that terminology from before, you use the box jump as a way to increase that potentiation to have a better squat when you do this exercise. Progression. They talk about the personal trainer can advance clients by adding horizontal or vertical components and gradually move through the intensity levels, which I agree with. And clients should first begin with a low intensity program, which can include drills as skips, squat jumps, and standing long jump. 100% on board. Keep in mind, when you're doing some of these drills, they're all ground based. As soon as you implement in a box that you have to land on, or a box that you step off of and then try to land on another one, or jump over a hurdle, or jump over a rope for jump rope, you're introducing in another degree of difficulty. So if you're just ground-based, it's more simple or simpler than jumping over something onto something. When you get to intermediate, you can go ahead and they'll probably have some weight training, so be strong enough to do some of these exercises, moderately intense plyometric exercises, split squats or bounding. And so they have some pretty good examples there of things to do. With warm-up, as with any training program, exercise must begin with a general warm-up, a specific warm-up, and then you get into the actual plyometric training itself. And usually that's part of a much bigger warm-up picture that lends itself to a more specific training goal for the day. And plyometric programs must include the many elements of essential to effective training program design. You need a needs analysis. You have to evaluate the variables and what you're trying to do within the program itself. And then the variables will include the mode, intensity, frequency, recovery, volume, program length, progression, and warm-up. All right, guys, moving on.